All right, did you see this yesterday? Secretary of State Marco Rubio came to JD Vance's defense after a CBS host criticized his speech in Munich and made this comparison to Nazi Germany.
I want to ask you about what happened in Munich, Germany at the security conference. Vice President Vance gave a speech, and he told U.S. allies that the threat he worries about the most is not Russia. It is not China. He called it the threat from within, and he lectured about what he described as censorship, mainly focusing, though, on including more views from the right. He also met with the leader of a far-right party known as the AfD, which, as you know, is under investigation and monitoring by German intelligence because of extremism. What did all of this accomplish other than irritating our allies?
Why would our allies or anybody be irritated by free speech and by someone giving their opinion? We are, after all, democracies. The Munich Security Conference is largely a conference of democracies in which one of the things that we cherish and value is the ability to speak freely and provide your opinions. And so I think if anyone's angry about his word, they don't have to agree with him, but to be angry about it, I think actually makes his point. I thought it was actually a pretty historic speech, whether you agree with him or not. I think the valid points he's making to Europe is we are concerned that the true values that we share, the values that bind us together with Europe, are things like free speech and democracy and our shared history in winning 2 world wars and defeating Soviet communism and the like. These are the values that we shared in common. And in that Cold War, we fought against things like censorship and oppression and so forth. And when you see backsliding and you raise that, that's a very valid concern. We can't tell them how to run their countries. He simply expressed in a speech his view of it, which a lot of people frankly share. And I thought he said a lot of things in that speech that needed to be said. And honestly, I don't know why anybody would be upset about it. People are allowed, you don't have to agree with someone's speech. I happen to agree with a lot of what he said, but you don't have to agree with someone's speech to at least appreciate the fact they have a right to say it, and that you should listen to it and see whether those criticisms are valid. I assure you, the United States has come under withering criticism on many occasions from many leaders in Europe, and we don't go around throwing temper tantrums about it.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history. I also think it's wrong. Again, I go back to the point of his speech. Okay, the point of his speech was basically that there is an erosion in free speech and intolerance for opposing points of view within Europe, and that's of concern because that is eroding. That's not an erosion of your military capabilities. That's not an erosion of your economic standing. That's an erosion of the actual values that bind us together in this transatlantic union that everybody talks about. And I think allies and friends and partners that have worked together now for 80 years should be able to speak frankly to one another in open forums. Without being offended, insulted, or upset. And I spoke to foreign ministers from multiple countries throughout Europe. Many of them probably didn't like the speech or didn't agree with it, but they were continuing to engage with us on all sorts of issues that unite us. So again, at the end of the day, I think that people give that is a forum in which you're supposed to be inviting people to give speeches, not basically a chorus where everyone is saying the exact same thing. That's not always going to be the case when it's a collection of democracies where leaders have the right and the privilege to speak their minds in forums such as these.
Mr. Secretary, I'm told that we are out of time. A lot to get through with you. We appreciate you making time today.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a minute.
Joe, what did you think about this exchange?
So let's get this straight. Her argument is that the Holocaust happened because of too much free speech. It was weaponized to conduct a genocide. Rubio, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is as serious as a prison fight and as sharp as anyone out there, period, was not having it. He also asked back, why would our allies or anyone be irritated by free speech? And to his point, the genocide was committed by an authoritarian Nazi regime. I mean, who knew that Face the Nation, once moderated by like actual journalists like Bob Schieffer, had morphed into The View? But that's where we're at this point. And Rubio handled it beautifully, and he's correct. And again, Margaret Brennan, who, remember, she co-moderated that vice presidential debate with JD Vance when she tried to fact-check Vance. Vance fact-checked her back, and then she cut off his mic. They're proving to be no different than MSNBC at this point. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
During VP Vance's comments, you could hear a pin drop, and afterwards, all you could hear were tears. I mean, I know these are smart people, but they keep pushing back, and they just keep rejecting everything that seems obvious.
Sure. Look, I mean, what you're seeing is the European version of what happened in America as Trump and MAGA gradually began to break up the old order and the old establishment. The European elites have controlled the continent. They basically built a huge welfare state. They opened their borders to millions of immigrants who are unassimilated, don't share their values. Just 2 days before the Munich conference, you had somebody drive a vehicle and kill 2 people, wounded, I think, 36. Again, nobody in Europe wants, and the elites want to talk about it. And I think JD Vance's speech, plus his speech in Paris earlier, those 2 speeches are the most important wake-up call to Europe, maybe in my lifetime, because he's just telling them the truth. If you don't change, if you don't modernize, if you don't become competitive, you're gone. You will cease to exist as a civilization, and that's a fact.
You know, in fact, the first sentence, the second sentence, he actually talked about that attack that you referenced, and he talked about how horrific it is. And of course, he's there with his family, and you know, and I think he was trying to make that connection, like, I'm with you, I'm here to help you, I'm here to help wake you up. And it's even arguable if they can even turn it around at this point. And of course, you referenced the MAGA movement. Here in America, we still have a lot of resistance. So yesterday on Face the Nation, host Margaret Brennan tried to take Vance to task. Many say that Rubio took it easy on her. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, the American left-wing elites are utterly, totally ignorant of history. They make up fantasies. They believe in the fantasies, and then reality hits them, and they're shocked. But here's what's going on. What JD Vance and I think President Trump and frankly, Secretary Hegseth in another speech, what they're trying to do is the equivalent of having an intervention if your neighbor's a total alcoholic, and you're trying to sit down and say to him, you have to change your life. We're trying to say to the European elites, you're not going to compete with artificial intelligence. You're not going to compete militarily. You're not going to be able to modernize your society. You're not going to be able to compete economically unless you have profound changes. And of course, the elites are fine. They're doing great. The country may be lousy, but they're doing great. So they don't want to change, and they're frankly angry at us for telling them the truth about their problem.
Yeah, they go around every 6 months to some palatial place, stay at 5-star restaurants, eat the greatest food in the world, and have these great discussions, and then agree to meet again in 6 more months, and everyone else suffers. You know, 2 weeks ago, you were at the White House, and I was reading where you wrote that you left, that when you left that visit, you were as hopeful as ever. So tell us this groundswell of hope, why it's different now.
Because you have in President Trump the most consequential president, I think, since Abraham Lincoln. You have somebody who's willing to look at the facts, offer totally new and unusual outside-the-box solutions, be very, very practical, negotiate with everybody, and both here at home and overseas, he's like a gigantic breath of fresh air. This is the closest we've come to being able to replace the 90-year-old Rooseveltian coalition, and it is the necessary intervention to help our European allies understand that they have to change if, in fact, they're going to survive. So the level of courage that President Trump, Vice President Vance, and their entire team is showing, I think is historic and remarkable. And look, they're going to make mistakes.
Sure.
You can't move at this speed, decide on things this big, and not have some things go wrong. But on balance, this is the most consequential presidency, I think, since Lincoln. Now, they've still got to pass a giant tax bill by May or June. They've still got to win the House elections next year. A lot of steps between here and history, but they're certainly off in the first month to an amazing start.
They really are. And I got to tell you, the roots of all of this go deep. Part of them touched you when you were speaker, so I really appreciate you, Newt. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date with future videos. Thank you for watching.